This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Jeff Fife is joining me here. He'll be taking over as the host for this show because Jeff's pretty good at that. Jeff, welcome.
The hostess with the mostest.
That's right.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be back. It's been a summer of quiet, at least for you and I. The last time we spoke was right before the UMBC game, which we'll talk about the second half of the podcast today. We'll chat about football coming up and transition to basketball. Before we do, some niceties. What have you been doing this summer?
This summer, trying to forget about the UMBC game. Thanks for reminding me about that.
Sure.
That's one thing. I spoke a couple of months ago to a group of senior sports fans at a local retirement community, and I talked about all kinds of stuff. And then I took questions, and the first question was, "What happened in the UMBC game?" And I think that for poor Tony, he's going to be dealing with that. We'll talk about this more later, but he'll be dealing with that question when he'll win 5 national championships. And when he dies, hopefully like 70 years, 80 years, the first line of his obituary is going to be, and he coached the team that lost as a 1 seed to the 16. So, aside from getting over that, watching a lot of bad baseball. I'm a Nats fan, so I've been watching a lot of bad Nats games and trying to figure out why they're stinking things up with a lot of UVA players on that team. And really just getting ready for the – this is a weird time of year sports-wise. That's one reason we haven't talked sports on the podcast a lot because Scott German and I, same thing. There's no UVA sports. Baseball ended for us early this year. It ended in May for the first time in 15 years. And so, yes, this is a silly season, but the ACC football kickoffs this week. Practice for football starts in a couple weeks. So we've got it's coming back, which is a good thing.
Speaking of coming back, let's talk about that football program and who is coming back, and probably more specifically this time, who isn't. It looks like significant losses when the final game of the season against Virginia Tech, and I watched senior night, and I watched the athletes with their mothers and the flowers and walking on the field, and then I thought to myself, wow, that's a lot of talent for a 6-7 team. 6-6 at the time.
At the time, yeah.
That we were losing. Who? I guess a 2-part question. Keep us back up to speed. It's been a little while. Who did we lose? And what are the new additions? And do they replace who we lost?
Well, start with on the offensive side, Kurt Binkert, who signed a free agent deal, I believe, with your Falcons, right? Didn't he sign a free agent deal with the Falcons?
Yeah, we love those backup Wahoos.
Yeah.
Bring Matt Schaub back if you would.
Yeah. So Binkert, as a starting quarterback the past 2 seasons, put up record numbers at UVA. And when you consider the guys, you mentioned Matt Schaub, Sean Moore. Put up record numbers at UVA is indicative of something as far as Binkert's concerned. But you lose him, you lose his primary deep threat, Andre Livroni, and there's other guys you lose. Those are the 2 key guys you lose. And on the defensive side of the ball, 2 of the more heralded defensive players UVA's ever had in Micah Kaiser, Quinn Blanding, and then another guy who, as part of that same recruiting class, Andrew Brown was actually a top 10 national recruit overall, along with Blanding when they first came out in 2014. All 3 of those guys, well, actually, surprisingly, Quinn Blanding not drafted. He's signed a free agent deal with the Redskins, and looks like he's got a shot of making that team. Brown and Kaiser both drafted, and so you got some other losses around the periphery there, but those are the 3 main guys you lose, and really. It's important to note 1 at each level, 1 lineman, 1 backer, one safety. Obviously, Blanding was the captain of that defense really from the first game or 2 he was on grounds at UVA. So big losses there, big losses on the other side of the ball. The question marks going in, and I'll stop and let you pepper me with more questions, but the big question marks going in are on both lines, which – that's where football's won and lost. We don't talk about those guys an awful lot. It's almost like a baseball umpire. You don't want to know their name unless something bad happened. They missed a call in the context of an offensive line. The only time you ever hear their name during a game is if a guy beats them for a sack or they get called for holding or something like that. Defensive line, You don't think much, especially in a 3-4 defense, about defensive linemen because they don't make a lot of sacks. They let the linebackers do their job. But UVA will be weaker at least going into the season on the two lines. A lot of skill guys coming back, some new skill guys coming in, but the question mark will be on the lines.
A lot of people will be looking to the transfer coming in Bryce Perkins. A little bit different style than Bankert. Arm probably not as big, maybe a bit faster. Where does the offense change with Perkins in our backfield? How many years do we have him? And what do you expect to see with him as a signal caller?
Perkins is the ideal quarterback for offensive coordinator Robert Anae's system. Think UVA played BYU when Mendenhall and Anae were at BYU back a few years ago. We played a home and home with them 2013, 2014. Won the 2013 game in Charlottesville. Weird game with bad weather, 3-hour delay in the middle of the game. But if you remember those games and lost the game out there, I think BYU scored 40 in that game in the win for them out in Provo. Remember those games? They played a really fast tempo, and they had a quarterback named Taysom Hill who is a very much like Perkins in the sense that mobile quarterback, good enough arm, but the read option offense really ran with him really well. He gained over 1,000 yards on the ground, threw for close to 3,000 his one full season. He had a couple of injury plagued seasons there, and that's what we'll expect. I mean, the numbers aside, the goal is to have a guy like Perkins, like Taysom Hill, that can run the offense. Where think of and UVA trying to run with Bankert, who is a drop back quarterback, not a guy who was going to beat you with his feet. That was before he tore his knee at ECU. He wasn't going to beat you with his feet even when he was fully healthy. He came to UVA with a torn ACL. Played well for 2 years, but if you think to the games you saw the last couple of years with Bankert in the backfield, almost all the snaps were out of the shotgun. Very rarely did he go under center, and even inside the 5-yard line, didn't go under center that much because that's the way the offense is designed. So he was taking snaps in the shotgun with either one or two, most of the time two guys flanking him, two running backs flanking him on either side. And that's because you're supposed to run the read option. And a read option works if the defensive ends have to think he might hand the ball off or he might take off with the ball. Well, with Bankert, you knew he wasn't going to take off with the ball. And so the defensive ends could crunch down and essentially take away our running game, or at least take away that handoff as an option. So we were really limited in the way the offense ran versus the skill sets that we had. And with Perkins, you'll have to account for him. Having seen him in the spring practice, saw him in the spring practice, he's got legit speed. He's a burner back there. I mean, he's a guy that could play wide receiver for a lot of programs if he wasn't a talented quarterback. He could be a wide receiver, punt returner. It kind of reminds me of Marcus Hagans from more than a decade ago now at UVA. And so you'll have to account for him in the running game. And that's going to be important because, as I mentioned, the offensive line has such deficiencies. Now, I just noticed literally half hour ago before we were getting ready to come on, UVA with I guess the students, the fall students are now able. They're now able to put the freshmen and the grad transfers on the roster officially. That was literally just today. It looks like that's the case. Before today, I haven't been able to analyze it as results too much today, but before today, there were 9 linemen listed on the UVA roster. No seniors. One redshirt junior, one regular junior, and then all freshmen and sophomores other than that. So a young group up front. You add, I think, a couple of grad transfers. Someone asked me this weekend, so what about those grad transfers? Well, nothing against them, but they left programs with eligibility left. That tells you their program, they weren't on their depth chart for the program they left. So they're works in progress at best. They're older guys, more mature, but the line will be a deficiency. So having a quarterback who is mobile will be a good thing. I mean, you wish you had a better line situation, and so they could block for him, and he wouldn't have to run for his life. But having a guy who can run for his life might not be a bad thing with this young line that is still learning really the whole offense.
I remember Hagan's at one point in time returning punts.
Yes.
Can he throw to himself? Who is out there? Does Zacchaeus take the smoke roll and get a lot of those snaps? You reference us losing Lebroni. Who's he got to throw to and hand the ball to?
I think Zacchaeus Zacchaeus was he'd already kind of taken that Smoke Mizell role. A guy with speed, but we've been using him just like Mizell as a third down kind of receiver, slot receiver, who also gets a lot of touches on motion kind of plays, wide receiver, slot receiver, running in motion, getting some pitches out of that read option. If the first handoff doesn't go and the quarterback decides to either keep or pitch to a guy running behind him, Zacchaeus got a lot of runs out of that offense, and so an interesting role for him. They're just trying to get their best, most talented guys the ball as often as possible, and then again, often when he catches the ball, he's got the ability to burn down the field, but also one-on-one out of the slot, he's a hard guy to cover. Usually you put a guy in the slot and it's either a linebacker or the nickel back. The nickel back being a defensive back who's not good enough to start, so there's a reason he's out there covering in the slot. So he can move the chains for you, and so Zacchaeus will play that role really importantly for this offense. And the offense, as much as at BYU when we saw it running really well, they like to play tempo. We didn't play tempo especially a lot the second half of last year because we were trying to eat clock because we didn't have a running game, because we didn't have a line, because we had so many issues offensively in terms of personnel. But when it's running in its optimum, this offense is a fast break offense. It's a push the envelope. Basically call plays call the plays quickly and try to run them long before you see the clock running down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so, but it's a ball control offense at the same time because it's not about the big play. It's about eating up the good BYU teams back in and Bronco won 5. He won 10 games or more 5 times out there in 11 seasons. They would run 90 to 100 plays a game when they were really running well, and really beat you in the fourth quarter with just the fact that your defense is out there defending so many plays that you run out of steam. So I think this offense has that potential. Jordan Ellis at running back is a guy that can do some damage if Perkins can create enough question marks on the perimeter with his ability to run. Evan Butts, tight end, is a weapon at tight end. So I think there's enough skilled players. I think if they stay healthy, there's enough skilled players to do some damage. Again, the question though is that line, can they block long enough?
Interesting, quote unquote, surge in the recruiting category this year. Some early commits, some 4-star kids, some enthusiasm. Is this an aberration? Or is this the system sort of starting to churn and work in Broncos' favor? Because we haven't seen too many 4-stars for a while, and they sound like some big nasties and opportunity to do something special with Virginia. But boy, it's hard to tell if this is something real here because it's been so long since the last group of 5-stars that we got are out the door, and they didn't bring us any banners, so to speak. So what are you thinking of this current recruiting surge?
I think it's a little overrated as a surge. 17 commits, and right now literally as we're talking, the class ranked 28th, but there's by rivals. One reason for the 28th is because that's a lot of commits at this stage. We're only in July. When you look at some other teams in the rankings around us, and I pointed this out in a column a couple weeks ago, and it's not gotten any better. But you look at TCU's 26th; they've got 14 commits. USC is a couple behind us with 11 commits. The number 28 comes because we have a total of 1,061 recruiting points, and there's a lot of factors go into that, but the number of players we got right now is a reason that we're 17 or 28th overall right now in the numbers, and that fluctuates daily, literally, as more commits come in. But 2 4-stars, and folks don't want to hear this. The Virginia folks don't want to hear this, but I was scrolling around to see where Virginia Tech is right now because they didn't have the number of commits that we had. And let's see, I got to go to the conferences, I guess, here real quick as we're talking. Virginia Tech had, even with the, you look at they've got 4 4-star commits among their 14 recruits. They are ahead of us in the rankings right now. And, these are the first 2 4-stars for Bronco in his era here. This is his 3rd full recruiting class. And they're good kids. I mean, from all accounts, you look at Jawan Briggs. He's a defensive tackle from Ohio. So it feels like a steal. You take a kid from the Midwest. Ohio State ostensibly was on his list. I mean, he had some Big Ten offers. Others, Michigan State were both offering. Hunter Stewart from Washington, D.C. That's closer to home. But again, D.C.'s recruited by a lot of schools. And, to get a guy from that area, both those guys can actually be the kind of guys you can help build a class around. They can help recruit other players, etc. But those are 2 4-star recruits. We're making a big deal about that. Justin Fuente, his first class, even when he was taking over for Beamer and, in the turmoil of taking over a class in midstream, December with a February signing date, he still kept 2 4-stars that Beamer recruited. He recruited 4 the next year, 5 the next year. He's got 4 already this year. That's 17 that he's got, and we're getting going crazy about Bronco with 2. It's positive. It's 2. 2 is greater than 0, but Serge, I mean, Bronco never recruited great at BYU, and he won a lot of games out there. So I'll give him credit for that. His recruiting classes at BYU, his best was somewhere in the mid-40s in all his years out there. His last several were in the 60s. Mike London could recruit. Mike London had 3 straight classes. His first 3 full classes were top 30 classes. Didn't win a lot of games. His worst class was his last full class, and it was in the mid-40s. That's pretty much, I mean, when this all shakes out, Broncos class will probably be around between 40 and 45. So I'm trying to say this, and I know that the fans who don't like me saying this, and they're making it very clear on the message boards and on Twitter, I'm being negative. I'm being realistic. These aren't things to jump up and down about. Virginia Tech's doing better than us. Everybody else in the ACC is doing better than us. Bronco's making strides, but he's got to do what he did at BYU, which is take 2 and 3-star kids and make them 4-star kids. And that's where this is going to – and that's what George Welsh did, honestly. George Welsh had some recruiting hits, obviously, but he turned a lot of kids that other schools didn't take and turned them into great players. And I think that's got to be the story of Bronco Mendenhall and his group. Is going to be what can they do with the because they've got an abundance of 2 and 3-star kids already recruited, not just this class but the previous 2 classes. They got to turn those kids into great players, or this isn't going to go anywhere.
We'll do a little tease at the end of the podcast. I'll ask you for your prediction. Last year, you gave me your prediction, and I asked if your company was doing drug testing. So let's see what happens at the end of this podcast with how many wins. I'll give you an over/under. How many wins you think Virginia comes up with? But with that, let's segue to basketball. As we sort of open talking a little bit about the summer, there's still a little bit of a hangover for you and I just talking about it with UMBC. The question is there a hangover for Tony's program? And is this an albatross that stays on its neck for the entire season, or is it a motivating factor for the team?
I think from what we're seeing, and when I say that, that's all stuff you pick up social media. I follow a lot of the players on Twitter and see what they're saying. Kyle Guy had a Facebook post that he also tweeted out from back probably about a month after the season, maybe not that far after the season, that made it clear to me what the mood of the guys was/is. Talked about how for a couple weeks the guys walked around grounds with hats down over their eyes. They didn't want to make eye contact with anybody, not because they were what would you say? Not because they were ashamed, but because they felt like they disappointed people, and it was hard living with that disappointment. But that turned into fuel, it seems. And Kyle Guy even made this point too, and I've always felt this way. You and Scott will get mad at me when whether you're together or separate on our podcast, and I'll say sometimes losing isn't bad. You can learn from a loss, right? And I know Scott got mad at me. It was back when UVA we were still unbeaten in the ACC play way late in the season, and I'm saying, you know what, a loss might not be a bad thing because
Just not to the Hokies.
just not to the Hokies, which as it turned out, yeah. But
on my birthday.
but sometimes you have
Hokies.
to lose to, and that loss that night, you lose by 1 point, you shoot 30% from the field, and everything goes wrong. You still lose by 1 point, and what do we do the rest of the way? We only lost one more game. Unfortunately, it was UMBC. But Kyle said he always thought the same way, that losing isn't always a bad thing because losing can make you realize what you need to do better, can make you work harder. And then he said, you know what? After this, though, I have learned to hate losing because there's that famous picture of him collapsing in the arms of DeAndre Hunter at the final buzzer. The UMBC kids are all celebrating, and that's the picture. In the foreground are those guys celebrating. But you can look not very far in the distance, right about a half court, and there's Kyle Guy. And he said DeAndre had to carry him off the court because he just could not fathom that happened that way. Those guys had worked so hard. Literally that game was a Friday night. I was in Charlotte for that. I had been in Brooklyn 6 days before, Saturday night, at the ACC Tournament Championship. Watched that team beat a good UNC team to win the ACC Tournament, and I left the floor that night with this confetti, and I'm holding up right now. You can't see on the radio. I guess if you were on News Channel 8, you could see the simulcast, right?
That's right.
But, I picked up this confetti, and I thought I had just watched the best ACC team I will ever see. Duke national champions, Carolina national champions. Virginia was 31-2 at that point. I did some math afterwards. They only trailed for like 5% of minutes in ACC play. They were 20-1 in the ACC. Led by double digits, something like 60% of the time in ACC play. Just absurd numbers. And then they lost by 20. They didn't just lose. They lost by 20 to UMBC. So truly anything can happen. But I look at that and say, this year's team, oddly, can and should be better. And we'll talk about that more, I guess. But I really look at this roster and say they're a year older. Some of the pluses and minuses, additions and subtractions, I think it'll come out on the plus side for UVA, as hard as it is to think with losing Devin Hall and Isaiah Wilkins. And then how many more jump shots do you shoot every day? How many more wind sprints do you run every day? How much more weight do you bench press and squat and, all that kind of stuff every day? Because the last thing you think before you go to bed is UMBC. So I think it'll be a positive, and I from what I'm seeing, I think that's what the players are thinking.
Talk to us about the starting five. Who are going to be in your projections, the regular rotation starting five? And are they better than the starting five that started last year?
There's a hedge here, and the hedge is, and we'll talk more about this, I guess, in a second, but Braxton Key, the transfer from Alabama, 4-star recruit, actually was being recruited at the same time UVA was recruiting DeAndre Hunter. And then it was between the two of them, and when Hunter committed first, Key said, well, I pretty much play the same position as Hunter. I'm not sure if I'll get minutes as a result of that, so he decided to go to Alabama. And then after a couple of years there, decides to transfer out. Doesn't like the situation down there and wanted to get out. And so he goes to his second college choice, which is UVA. So I leave it a question because of this. We know that obviously Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy are two guys in the backcourt. UVA plays a 3-guard, 2-forward system, so I'm hedging it that way. I know a lot of people still think of 2 guards, 2 forwards center. UVA doesn't play that way. They play 3 guards, 2 forwards. So we know it's Jerome and Guy. We know that Jack Salt will start at center. I don't think there's any question about that. I know a lot of folks say, why is Jack Salt starting? He scores 2 points a game. Jack Salt is starting as long as he's in that locker room because Tony Bennett loves him. What he does defensively, what he does setting screens in that mover blocker offense, he doesn't have to score. He does what Tony asked him to do. He's perfect at that job for that offense, for that team. So you got Jerome, you got Guy, you got Salt. They're definitely starting. Hunter is definitely starting. No question about the fact that DeAndre Hunter, we're fortunate that he's even back because, and I'll say a quick aside about this. I've probably said this to you before, Jeff, but in the media room at UVA basketball games, it's an interesting mix because it's not just reporters. There's also other folks in there, including NBA scouts. And I remember Scott German and I, before the first game last year, I think it was UNC Greensboro. We're doing what we do. We're hanging out, and I think it was Matt Doherty was in there. Doherty works as a scout. And so Scott casually asked, we're sitting there eating whatever pasta or whatever we're eating for dinner. So, who are you here to watch? And we're assuming he's going to say, well, I'm here to see Kyle Guy. I'm here to see Devin Hall. First name out of his mouth was DeAndre Hunter, who none of us had seen because he redshirted the year before. He was a redshirt freshman last year. DeAndre Hunter, quickly. We haven't even got the words out. DeAndre Hunter. And so now Hunter didn't play. He had a couple of good games in November, December, but he also had some DNPs because he didn't get off the bench. And then he ends up being ACC Sixth Man of the Year. And so, Hunter now goes from playing 20 minutes a game to playing 35 minutes a game for this team. The question, though, is at 3? Is he the small forward, big guard? Is he Devin Hall or is he Isaiah Wilkins? Is he going to be 3 or 4? Braxton Key determines whether he's 3 or 4. If Key is available, and the quick about Braxton Key is, he's a sophomore, rising junior eligibility wise, so that means he's not a grad transfer. So now can't transfer and play right away, but he's actually applied for a medical hardship. There's a family member who apparently, there's an NCAA rule if you have a family member who is dying. And there's a thought. So there's a story about that. I'm not sure exactly all the details about that, but essentially, there's a good chance that Braxton Key was going to get a medical hardship, and he'll be able to play right away at UVA. If he's playing right away, I don't care what position it is. He's playing. He's starting for this team, and then you have DeAndre Hunter starting with this team. If he's not available, then I think that it gets back to, and let's assume he's not available because, until otherwise, then you have to decide, does Hunter start in the backcourt? If he starts in the backcourt, that means Mamadi Diakite's the 4, which is a great option. Diakite's ready to start, I think. Had a couple really good games in the ACC tournament, double-figure games in the first 2 rounds of the ACC tournament. But then who's the 3rd forward is a question because Jay Huff would naturally seem to be the 3rd forward. But torn labrum, he's recovering. We needed him to spend the entire offseason getting better at basketball. He's had to spend the entire offseason getting himself healthy. Is it Francisco Cafaro? Could be. He had a great run in the FIBA Junior Championships here recently. But he's 7 foot tall and about 110 pounds. It looks like from seeing him on tape. So exaggerating slightly, but it looks like he needs to fill out a little bit more. So then if Hunter starts in the front court, then Marco Anthony needs to step up. And then who's our backup guard as well? Is it Kihei Clark, 5'9" point guard, freshman? Is it Cody Statman from Australia, a 6'7" freshman? I think our top 7 is pretty set. Who's our 8? That's the big question.
Is this top 5, top 7 better than last year's starting 5, you believe? Kate saying Key is not in it.
I think overall it's better because it's hard to say this again. Devin Hall got picked in the 2nd round of the NBA draft. He's going to be an NBA player this year, and so we lost one of our 2 guys we lost in the NBA. Isaiah Wilkins, though, at the 4, great defensive player, offered nothing on offense, literally, and less on offense even than he did the year before. And so teams could cheat off him and cheat off Salt when they were in the game together. And the UVA team was honestly better when he was off the floor. Think of the Duke game down at Duke. Wilkins was ineffective in that game. Only played 14 minutes, I think it was, that night. And Hunter, when Duke played that zone, which they had to play because their guys didn't play defense, their one and dones, this group didn't play any defense. It was Hunter when he played that position where we sneak the 4 in at the foul line, and either he drives to the basket or hits that jump shot. That was the key to that game. He beat Syracuse twice this year in a similar fashion. So we were a better team when it was him on the floor with Hall, of course, as a part of that. He can't replace both those guys, and so that's why but he'll be playing 35 a night now. He was playing 20 a night before. 35 minutes a night of DeAndre Hunter unleashed is going to be interesting. We haven't seen it. You know that Guy and Jerome are going to give you 35 minutes a night in the backcourt. And so, yeah, it's going to take someone else stepping up. But I still think even not knowing right now who it is and even not thinking it can be Braxton Key, just assuming it's not, I still think the starting five is better just because I expect Hunter is going to be – he's going to give us the kind of season that will lead him to be a lottery pick in the NBA draft next year. And when's the last time we had a lottery pick? So.
Do you think the last year this group of kids went in unheralded, unranked, and finish out the ACC in record fashion? What a roller coaster of a season. Where do you think UVA starts? I mean, they released 2 months ago, right after the NCAA tournament closed out.
Yeah.
Their beginning preseason prognostications. Where does UVA start the year ranked, do you think?
I think if Key is not part of the equation, probably somewhere between 5 and 8. I've seen as high as like 2, even without Key as part of the equation. I think if Key's in the equation, number 1 is not out of the realm of possibility because and I think a big question. David Teal at the Newport News Daily Press, dean of UVA sports writers, asked this question out loud in a column recently. The ACC Operation Basketball will be interesting in October. That's when the assembled media get together, vote on preseason on all ACC teams, preseason predictions in terms of the finish. Does UVA actually get love as the number 1 team in the ACC? Because in the question there being, we haven't had that since the Ralph Sampson era. With this recent run of success, 3 regular season championships, 2 ACC tournament championships in the last 5 years. Not preseason number 1 any of those years. And so there is a distinct possibility, and David Teal even thinks it might be a probability, that UVA will, even with Duke having the top 3 recruits in this year's recruiting class, all the heralded nature of that kind of thing, that UVA might actually emerge from ACC Operation Basketball as the preseason favorite for the first time since Ralph. And I don't think that's at all ridiculous to even think, because as much talent as Duke will bring in this year, I was getting ready to say bring back. They bring back literally nothing this year. They have a lot of talent coming in, but look at the depth, look at the history, look at the I was getting ready to say senior nature. The guys I'm talking about, Jack Salt's the senior. So, the veteran nature, though, in this system that has proven to be so successful. I think UVA, that's why. So we were talking about this the other night, Jeff. What might be your next question, the Braxton Key question.
Yes.
Braxton Key's part of this team, and the future is extremely bright for this program, if that's the case.
Yeah, in my humble opinion, as we talked about at WWE Extreme Rules, is that it's probably best for him not to get that red shirt medical
maybe, right?
exemption, and for the team, because we probably will lose, a kid to the NBA, and then we got 2 years of eligibility, and then there's more of a natural transition. It sounded like you wanted an all-in concept, and let's get it this year. What's better for UVA, do you think? To have him for 2 years and let him learn the system for a year, or fire him up right away?
That the question about let him learn the system is a key one as far as this goes, because I'm selfish, and I bet there are a lot of UVA fans out there selfish as I am. We've never won. I mean, as much as we like to talk about UVA has won 25 national championships in all the sports. Okay, we've not won one in football. We've not won one in men's basketball, and those are the sports that people care about. With forgiveness to soccer fans and tennis fans and lacrosse fans and swimming fans and everything else, it's basketball and football, and then it's everything else. And because I'm the idiot last year who said I thought this was an ACC champion Final Four caliber team when no one else saw that, and then it turns out I was wrong because we lost their first round of the tournament, I guess. But that all said, I look at this team and say, you put that roster with Braxton Key in the mix. It's hard for me, aside from an injury, and I would argue that the DeAndre Hunter injury wasn't worth 20 points in that game, but it was worth losing that game, unfortunately. And I don't think we would have won the championship without Hunter last year, whether we get past UMBC or Kansas State or whoever. He was that good of a player for us and that important part of the machine. I want to win a championship, and we're going to lose Hunter after this year. We're going to lose Hunter after this year. We're fortunate to have one more year of the young man, and so we'll still have for the team in 2 years. We'll still have Guy and Jerome, and we'll still have Diakite, and we'll have some of these young guys will get older and that kind of thing. But you talk about an accumulation of talent and chemistry that goes into to having a championship potential team. Key can be key to that. Now, but your question, one thing you said there as you were asking that question. So here I am being all selfish, like, oh yeah, let's just throw them all in there and play basketball. I mean, it is an important thing to point out that Tony's system is very hard to learn. We're talking about DeAndre Hunter being a lottery pick in next June. He would have been a first-round pick likely. A lot of people said first-round pick this year if he'd come out. But we redshirted him last year because Tony's system's that hard to pick up. I remember, and I say this a lot, but I remember interviewing Anthony Gill during Gill's breakout season, his junior season at UVA. And he had redshirted, a sophomore season at UVA. He had redshirted the year before after sitting out a year because he transferred from South Carolina. And, everybody talked about how great a player he was. And then it was really not until February of that year that he started doing anything. He had a couple of games, I think the Davidson game that year. And the team I'm talking about is a team that won the first ACC tournament championship in UVA history for 38 years at that point. And so I asked him at one of the ACC tournament games, like, what happened? Like, you went from no points in 2 minutes, and now you're the leader of this team. And he said it took him that long to figure out his responsibilities on the defensive end. And once he figured out what he needed to do defensively, then the rest of the game just happened naturally. But it took him until Valentine's Day, after redshirting a year, to finally have it all go off for him. So, I'm wanting to throw Key in the mix this year because and, that's a very talented team, et cetera, et cetera. But, yeah, maybe we don't get the best Braxton Key as a result. Think Nigel Johnson last year. Nigel Johnson transferred from Rutgers where he scored double digits, averaged double digits a game there. He had some shining moments. He also had some terrible moments. The Virginia Tech game, I would argue, was his defensive lapses in the first half of that game key to us losing that game. So it's hard. That system is not what Coach K does at Duke, which is roll the ball out there and say, go play basketball, young men. It's a very intricate, detailed system. You have to know your responsibilities both offensively and defensively, and that will be hard for Key to pick up in short time.
So if we had drum roll sound effects, we'd be hitting it right now. Let's get your predictions for football and basketball. If I threw the over-under at you for UVA football this year at 5, where do they land? Are they bowl eligible again this year, or are they coming up short?
Well, be nicer to me and give me at least what Vegas would do and say 5.5.
I'll give you 5.5 then.
Because I want to go with 5.
You're going with 5 victories. That's 2 more than I would give them.
Well, and I give it for this reason. I don't think it's because they're going to play great. The schedule is the worst in the ACC. And I say that, I'm saying that subjectively, and I've also seen some other subjective analyses of that. You look at the non-conference schedule, it's Richmond, it's at Indiana, another team that won 5, they won 5 games last year. They beat us, but they won 5 games last year, not expected to do great this year. Ohio U, which is not the good Ohio U from MAC, from when they were winning the MAC every year. We're sort of Ohio U in decline, sort of Ohio U. And then Liberty in November in the middle of the ACC schedule. So, you got to win 3 of those games. Maybe you could win 4 of those games. It's still not play great football, but you're at least 3-1 in those 4. Which means to win 5, you only got to win 2 more games. And we're not playing now. We are playing the 2 Techs on the road at the end of the season, but we're not getting Florida State. We're not getting Clemson. We are getting NC State on the road, but you got Carolina, which won 3 games last year, getting them at home this year. At Duke, a team. I think that's a 50-50 game. You do get Miami at home, and we're going to get pounded there. Played them well last year down there, but they're going to pound us this year. Louisville, you get at home early in the season, sometime either the 22nd or 29th of September. Lamar Jackson-less Louisville, a team that we played great when he was there. Should have beat them 2 years ago, for example, when he was there. So, we're gonna by accident win a couple of ACC games. Go 3-1 in non-conference play, go 2-6 in the ACC. This team, maybe by the Liberty game, is going to be thinking that they can go back to a bowl. They might have their 5th win after the Liberty game. But if they don't have a 6th win after the Liberty game, it ain't happening because Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech on the road. Those aren't going to be winnable games, especially the Virginia Tech game down there to finish the season out.
So in the world of basketball, let's take, instead of a record and wins, let's look at placement in the ACC by the end of the season. If I gave you the over-under is 2, second place in the ACC, where do they land?
Over.
So
I
you
really
think
do.
they're first?
I really do think that because Duke will have a lot of talent, and we don't know how they'll mesh. The group in 2015 ended up meshing well. They didn't mesh well at first. That group that won the championship that year came into JPJ with a 4-3 ACC record and was losing by 11 points with 4 minutes to go and made every 3-point shot they threw up after that and won that game. And then won the national championship. I think they lost one game the rest of the way that year. They eventually meshed well. The past couple groups didn't. And so that's the problem with one and dones. Look at Kentucky. Both Kentucky and Duke in the one and done era have each won one national championship. You have a lot of talented guys who don't get a lot of time together. Last year's group at Duke, for example, couldn't play defense. Marvin Bagley III would not play defense, and he could play defense. He's athletic enough to play great defense, but he didn't play defense. He had to play a zone, and you're not going to win a lot of games playing defense the way they did or didn't play, as the case may be. So, I can't say this group won't play defense automatically. They might be great defensively. We just don't know. So, at this stage, having to hedge on that, Virginia's got the most talent coming back of any of the ACC schools. Carolina's always going to be Carolina, but they lose some guys. They got fortunate that Luke May came back, but they lost some key guys from their groups, and it comes down to me. Those 3 schools are right now. That's the ACC, and it's so nice to be able to say that the ACC is Duke, Virginia, UNC. Maybe not in that order right now, but I think Virginia stands above the other 2 right now in terms of what we know they have coming back. And I think DeAndre Hunter is the ACC Player of the Year. I think he and Kyle Guy are both first-team All-ACC guys. I'm not sure we'll be as good defensively as we've seen because you lose not just Isaiah Wilkins, but you also lose Devin Hall, an underrated, great defensive player playing guard. If Key is part of the mix and DeAndre Hunter is in the backcourt playing defense, this could be as good or better than last year's defensive team. But if he has to play, I still think Hunter is better as a guard for this team. If he has to play a lot of forward, if he has to play a lot of big guys in the post, we're gonna suffer there a little bit. But he's also going to stretch guys out at the 4 offensively and more than make up for that. But I don't think we'll quite be as stingy defensively this year. We'll be a lot better offensively this year. And I think vis-a-vis the rest of the ACC, I think that we're that much better than the rest of the groups.
So not bowl eligible for football,
Right.
ACC regular season champions in basketball.
Right.
What's on deck for the AFP? What sort of analysis are you looking at? What are you going to be involved in the coming weeks for your readers and fans to be aware of?
Well, this is a silly season because now, the ACC football kickoff this week. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. We're not going to the ACC kickoff for the first time in a while because, I'm actually going to be covering it from the home office. The ACC does a great job, almost too good a job, if you ask me, of putting everything that they have there at the kickoff in Charlotte online. And so, why do I need to go and stand and hold a microphone among 30 guys and ask the same questions everybody else asks when I could just do it from here? But that gets us started. There'll be some stuff. In fact, look on AFP this week. We'll be sharing all the transcripts from those press conferences. I'll be working on those this week. In fact, we're going to share from all the ACC school coaches, particular focus on the Coastal because both Virginia and Virginia Tech are Coastal teams, Coastal Division teams. And we'll start getting ready for UVA. Practice again starts in a couple weeks. But here's the weird thing to me. All this talk that you'll hear, and I'm sure you do the same thing, Jeff. When this time of year, we're all looking at what anybody writes about preseason football. I've looked at 3 this morning to say, what does this guy think about it? Now, what does this guy think? And what was this guy's analysis? There's no preseason game like in the NFL. You can watch your Falcons, at least get a glimpse of what they're going to look like. That they're calling games vanilla. The starting players only play a quarter, then 2 quarters, then 3 quarters, etc. But at least you got something. We got nothing until Richmond, September 1st. And the big question for me is always going to be, with this team, the offensive line particularly, we just don't know. So I will say that to you right now. Anybody who tells you they know, even me, I'm telling you 5 wins. Anybody who tells you they know anything is full of it because we don't know. I know more about basketball because there's so much back and there's so few moving parts. But football, you got to have 50 guys. You got to have your 2 deep is 44 guys in terms of your 11 starters on offense and defense. Their backups. You need depth. There's so, and, if your line doesn't play well, does your quarterback's numbers or your running back's numbers, are they reflective of how bad they are or how bad your line is, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I guess to answer the question, the hardest thing for me to do the next 6 weeks, waiting for September 1st, is I've got a lot to write about, but I'm telling you right now, and I'll try to be honest a few times during this process. It's all speculation. It's all guesswork. Even Richmond is going to be kind of guesswork because that's a 1AA team that did beat us 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Actually,
sat in those stands and left early.
Yeah. But that said, it's all guesswork until then.
Well, and your speculation has been strong lately. So you predicted the power of UVA basketball when no one else was looking at them, as well as 6 wins and bowl eligibility last year. So we'll see how you do at the tail end of the season. We'll go back and take a peek. And for all the folks, just stay close to AFP as they drop in the information coming up with the ACC football kickoff and all your UVA sports, news, politics, Augusta Free Press. I am Jeff Fife for AFP editor Chris Graham. Y'all have a great day.